In the autumn of 1964, inside a converted ballroom on the second floor of a civic center in Long Beach, California, 312 people sat in folding chairs arranged in tight rows around a raised demonstration floor. The ceiling was low. The air smelled of liniment and old carpet. Outside, the boulevard moved with its ordinary business, deliveries, school buses, the slow commerce of a Tuesday afternoon, indifferent to what was about to happen 12 feet above the sidewalk. The man at the center of the room was not Bruce Lee. He stood 6 feet 2 inches tall and weighed 217 pounds. He was 24 years old. His name was Leon Hullbrook, and for the previous 3 years he had traveled under the title of Western Regional Full-Contact Karate Champion, a credential he had earned twice in succession and which he carried with the easy weight of a man who had never once doubted its meaning. He wore a white gi without a single crease in it. His stance was deep and wide, the kind of stance that communicates, before a single technique is thrown, that the body behind it understands exactly what it is capable of. 2 instructors in his own school used the word flawless when they described his roundhouse kick. The tournament director that afternoon, a former collegiate wrestler named Gerald Fitch, had watched hundreds of men move on demonstration floors over the course of 11 years. He would say later, in a letter to a colleague in San Diego, that Leon Hullbrook was the most physically convincing martial artist he had ever placed on a program. In 14 seconds, his opinion of the afternoon would change entirely. 14 seconds. From the moment the smaller man rose from his chair in the third row to the moment Leon Hullbrook sat back down on the demonstration floor with both palms flat against the boards, absorbing the fact of what had just occurred. 14 seconds in front of 312 trained martial artists is not 14 seconds in the way the clock on the wall measures it. Those who were present have spent decades trying to describe what those 14 seconds actually were. Not one of them has fully succeeded. But stay until the end of this account, and you will understand why. Because the sentence that Bruce Lee said to Leon Hullbrook before he walked back to his chair, the sentence that only Hullbrook could hear, would take Leon Hullbrook 22 years to repeat to another human being. And when he finally did, it changed how that person taught martial arts for the rest of his life. Leon Hullbrook had been invited to the 1964 Long Beach International Karate Championships as a demonstration artist, not a competitor. That distinction mattered to him. Competitors performed for judges. Demonstration artists performed for history. He had given 9 such demonstrations in the previous 2 years, and each one had built the architecture of a reputation that now preceded him into every room he entered. He was known for 3 things in the Southern California martial arts circuit of the early 1960s. First, his speed. His front kick had been timed informally at the Pasadena dojo on a spring afternoon in 1962 by a man with a stopwatch and a background in track coaching, and the number that came back had caused a brief silence in the room before conversation resumed at a slightly higher register. Second, his power. He had broken 11 boards in a single strike at a demonstration in Anaheim in June of that year. And the boards had been standard 1-inch pine, not the kiln-dried competition boards that some practitioners quietly preferred. Third, and most important to Leon Hullbrook himself, his credentials. He had studied under 2 separate masters. He had competed in 41 sanctioned tournaments. He had lost 3 of them, 2 by split decision. 1 on a technicality involving boundary rules that he still considered incorrect. He had never lost a physical confrontation. He arrived at the Long Beach Civic Center at 11 in the morning on the day of the championships, 3 hours before the scheduled program, because he believed that a man who arrives when the work begins has already conceded something to the room. He walked the demonstration floor. He tested the give of the boards with his heel. He noted the ceiling height, the distance from the edge of the raised platform to the first row of chairs, the location of the 2 exit doors. These were not the habits of a nervous man. They were the habits of a man who understood preparation as a form of respect. Respect for the craft, and by extension, for himself. By early afternoon, the chairs were filling. The program had drawn a serious audience. Martial arts in Southern California in 1964 existed in a particular cultural moment. It was no longer a fringe practice, not yet a mainstream one, and the people who gathered in rooms like this one were overwhelmingly practitioners themselves. They came to evaluate, not to be entertained. They would know what they were watching. That fact mattered to Leon Hullbrook. He had no interest in impressing an uninformed crowd. The program ran in sequence. 4 demonstration artists appeared before Leon Hullbrook, each one credentialed, each one competent, each one receiving the measured, attentive response of a room full of people who understood what they were seeing. When Hullbrook's time came, he moved to the center of the floor and performed for 11 minutes without pause. What he did in those 11 minutes is described in Gerald Fitch's program notes as a demonstration of technical proficiency at the highest level of the Western competition tradition. The crowd's response when he finished was the response a room of practitioners gives to something it recognizes as legitimate, sustained, quiet, and completely genuine. He returned to the side of the floor and accepted a glass of water from one of his students. It was at this point that the program coordinator, a man named Ed Parker, took the microphone and invited any practitioners in the audience who wished to ask questions of the demonstration artists to come forward. Leon Hullbrook set down his glass. A man stood up in the third row. He was 5 feet 7 inches tall. He weighed 135 pounds. He was wearing a plain white shirt and dark slacks, the clothes of someone who had perhaps come from an office or from a meeting and had not changed before arriving. His shoes were not training shoes. He had no visible marking of rank, no association patch, no dojo emblem. He appeared, to the 312 people watching, to be a spectator who had wandered into a room where he did not entirely belong. Leon Hullbrook looked at him the way a man who has spent years calibrating opponents looks at something that does not register as an opponent. The man in the white shirt said, in a clear and unhurried voice, that he had a question about distance management in close-range fighting. Ed Parker, who knew exactly who was standing in the third row, said nothing. Leon Hullbrook said, with the particular patience of a man who has spent years answering questions from people below his level, that he would be happy to address any question the gentleman had. The gentleman in the third row thanked him. Then Leon Hullbrook said the thing he would spend the rest of his life wishing he had not said. He said, "Though I'll be honest with you, friend, a man your size asking questions about close-range fighting is like a man asking about deep-sea fishing from a rowboat. There are limits to what the body makes available to you." The room went very still. Not the stillness of offense, the stillness of attention. Because 3 people in that room knew exactly who was standing in the third row. Ed Parker was one of them. A tournament director from Seattle named Raymond Cho was the second. The third was a stunt coordinator named Dale Ishimoto, who had worked with the man in the white shirt on a film set 4 months earlier and who, at this precise moment, set down his own glass of water on the floor beside his chair with a care that suggested he wanted both hands entirely free. If you want to know what happened in the next 14 seconds, make sure you are subscribed to this channel and drop a comment below telling us where you are watching from. Because what Bruce Lee did next was witnessed by 300 people, and almost none of them told the same story twice. Bruce Lee stood without hurry. He did not stretch. He did not roll his neck. He did not assume a stance or shift his weight or draw a breath in any way that announced preparation. He simply rose from the folding chair as a man rises from a folding chair, completely all at once, and moved toward the demonstration floor at the pace of someone crossing a room to answer the door. He removed the white shirt. He folded it once along the line of the collar and set it on the empty chair beside him. Gerald Fitch, watching from the scoring table at the edge of the floor, would write in that letter to San Diego that the act of folding the shirt was the first moment he understood that he was not watching the same category of event he had been watching all afternoon. Row by row, in the silence that had replaced the room's ordinary noise, the recognition moved through the audience the way a current of cold water moves through a warm lake. Not all at once, but in a wave that started at the back left corner of the room and traveled toward the front right, and which passed through the body of Raymond Cho at precisely the moment Bruce Lee stepped onto the demonstration floor and stopped. He stopped 8 feet from Leon Hullbrook. He did not cover that last 8 feet. He simply stood at the edge of it and waited. This is the first thing that every witness who later described the encounter mentioned before anything else. Not the speed, not the technique, the distance, the specific, settled quality of 8 feet of space maintained with such precision that it communicated, to everyone in the room with sufficient experience to read it, that the man holding that distance had already decided how this would end. A fight is not two men approaching each other. A fight is a conversation about distance, who controls it, who surrenders it, and what the terms of that surrender turn out to mean. Leon Hullbrook understood this principle. He had taught it himself, in his own school to his own students many times. He stepped forward to close the 8 feet. Bruce Lee let him close 4 of them. At 4 feet, the geometry of the encounter changed. Leon Hullbrook's preferred techniques, the long-range roundhouse, the sweeping rear kick. The combinations he had built over 11 years into a coherent and devastating system required the distance he had just surrendered. At 4 feet, none of them were available in the form in which they were designed to work. They could still be thrown. They would simply land differently than he intended. He did not yet know that he had already made the only mistake that was going to matter. Second one, Leon Hullbrook threw the front kick. It was a genuine front kick, not a test, not a probe, not a commitment of 50%. It was the technique as it existed in his body after 11 years of practice, thrown at the speed and with the structure it possessed on the best day he had ever produced it. The 2 instructors in his school who called it flawless were not wrong. It was flawless. Bruce Lee moved 4 inches to the outside of it, not backward, not to the side, forward and to the outside, so that the kick passed through the space where his center line had been and found nothing. The movement was so small that Dale Ishimoto, watching from the 4th row, had to revise his memory of it twice in later conversations, because the first version he told, in which Bruce Lee simply was not where he had been, did not seem sufficient to describe a physical action. It was not a dodge. It was an answer to a question the kick had not known it was asking. Second 3. Leon Hullbrook's second technique came from the same side but at a different angle, rotating through a horizontal arc aimed at the left side of the smaller man's head. It was the kind of strike that wins tournaments. Gerald Fitch's both hands came flat to the surface of the scoring table. His pen stopped moving. He would later be unable to account for the pen, whether he had set it down deliberately or whether it had simply left his hand without his awareness. Bruce Lee redirected it. Not blocked, not parried. He brought his left forearm into contact with Leon Hullbrook's extending arm at a point approximately 7 inches above the wrist, and applied, not force against force, but a slight angular correction, the way a man adjusts the course of a door that is swinging on its own weight, 2 fingers placed at the correct moment. 5 degrees of change producing an entirely different destination. The strike completed its arc. It landed on the empty air 4 inches to the left of where it had been aimed. Leon Hullbrook felt, for the first time, that something in the accounting of the afternoon had shifted. Second 5. He committed fully. This was the correct response according to everything he knew. A partial commitment against a man with this kind of evasion would simply provide more material for the same answer. A full commitment, properly structured, would test whether the evasion was technique or luck. He threw the rear leg roundhouse kick, his best technique, the one timed on the stopwatch in Pasadena 2 years earlier. The one that had ended 11 of his 41 tournament bouts in a single exchange. He threw it at full speed, full rotation, full extension. He did not need to throw a third technique after this one. What happened in second 7 is the part of the story that the witnesses disagreed about for decades, not because it was unclear, because clarity was not equal to comprehension. Bruce Lee moved inside the arc of the kick, forward, closing the distance to 18 inches, and brought his right hand into contact with the center of Leon Hullbrook's chest at the precise moment when the kick had passed its apex, and Hullbrook's weight was distributed in the configuration that follows a fully committed rotational technique. It was not a blow in any sense that the word typically carries. It was a placement. A hand placed against a chest with an intention behind it that had nothing to do with the muscles of the arm or the shoulder. What left Leon Hullbrook's feet and deposited him on the boards of the demonstration floor 2 seconds later appeared, to the 300 people watching, to be a consequence of physics rather than force. He sat down on the floor with both palms flat against the boards. He was not hurt. He was not unconscious. He was not in any physical distress of any kind. He simply could not, in that first moment, assemble the information in front of him into a sequence that made sense. The room did not make a sound for 4 seconds. Raymond Cho, the tournament director from Seattle, would say in a conversation 17 years later that those 4 seconds of silence were the loudest thing he had ever heard in a room full of martial artists. Bruce Lee stood where he had been standing. He did not step back. He did not assume a ready position. He extended his right hand, palm upward, toward the man seated on the floor in front of him. Leon Hullbrook looked at the hand. This is the fork in the road. Every man who ends up on the floor of a room like that one faces a version of this choice. It is not a physical choice. The body has already rendered its verdict. The choice is about what the man decides to make of it. What story he selects from the several that are now available to him, and which story he will carry for the rest of his life. It is the most private choice in any public encounter. Leon Hullbrook reached up and took the hand. Bruce Lee helped him to his feet. And then, Bruce Lee said something to him, quietly, at a distance of approximately 18 inches. In a voice that carried to no chair in the room, he held Leon Hullbrook's hand for a moment longer than a handshake requires. Then he walked back to the third row, picked up the folded white shirt, put it on, and sat down. Dale Ishimoto, as Bruce Lee passed the end of the fourth row on his way back to his seat, reached out and pressed one hand briefly to Bruce Lee's shoulder. Not in congratulation. In the way a man makes contact with something he wants to confirm is actually present. The story left that room on 14 separate mouths. By the following week it had reached dojos in 3 states. Within a month, the number of people who claimed to have been present at the 1964 Long Beach Championships had grown by a factor of 4. Within a year, there were practitioners in Seattle and in Phoenix and in a small school outside of Toronto who had heard the story in forms that bore only a partial resemblance to the events that Gerald Fitch had recorded in his program notes. In some versions, the encounter had lasted longer. In others, there had been a second challenger. In one version that circulated briefly through the Northern California circuit, the kick that Leon Hullbrook threw had broken a board on its way past Bruce Lee's shoulder. This is what oral history does. It adds what it needs and removes what it cannot carry, and what it cannot carry is usually the most important thing. The silence. The 8 feet of held distance. The quality of the hand offered to the man on the floor, but the story in all its versions did not stop traveling. Because the people who carried it for a reason. They were not carrying a story about fighting. They were carrying a story about what they wanted to believe was possible, that the thing they practiced, in their own gyms, at their own levels, pointed towards something real. The story told them it did. Leon Hullbrook returned to his school the following week and taught his regular Tuesday class. He did not mention Long Beach. He did not change the curriculum. He taught the front kick and the rear roundhouse and the combinations he had spent 11 years building into a coherent system, and he taught them with the same precision and the same authority that had earned him his reputation. But he added one thing. At the end of the class, before his students bowed out, he told them about distance. Not the mechanics of it, the philosophy of it. He told them that the man who controls the geometry of the encounter has already answered most of the questions that will arise within it. He told them that a fight is not 2 men hitting each other. A fight is a negotiation about space, and the terms of the negotiation are set before the first technique leaves the body. He had not understood this before Long Beach. He had known it. There is a difference. 22 years later, in 1986, at a private dinner in a small restaurant in Burbank, California, Leon Hullbrook sat across from a younger martial arts instructor named Dennis Park and told him for the first time what Bruce Lee had said to him on the demonstration floor as he helped him to his feet. He said Bruce Lee had told him, "You have a beautiful system. Learn what it cannot reach." Dennis Park went home and wrote it down. He is still teaching. What the people who were present in that room in Long Beach in 1964 carried home with them was not a story about a small man defeating a large man. That story exists, and it is not without value, but it is not the story that lasted. The story that lasted is about what Leon Hullbrook chose to do with what had just been placed in front of him. He could have constructed a different narrative. He had materials available for it, the unconventional circumstances, the informal setting, the absence of agreed rules. None of it would have been persuasive to anyone in that room, but it would have been available. He did not reach for it. He took the hand. He stood up. He listened to what was said, and he went home and eventually taught it to someone else. The measure of a man who has been humbled is not what he was before the humbling, it is what he builds afterward. That is not a comfortable truth in the moment it becomes relevant. It is the only truth that remains useful once the moment has passed. Certainty is not the same thing as capability. Every man in that room already knew it. Leon Hullbrook learned it in a way that stayed with him for the rest of his professional life. That is the difference between knowing something and understanding it at a depth from which it cannot be taken back. Next week, we will tell the story of the night Muhammad Ali walked into a karate school in Los Angeles and asked the head instructor, a man who had never heard of him, to show him what a real strike felt like. What happened in the following 4 minutes has never been fully reported. Until now.